I'm not sure when or how people became confused, but nonetheless, I feel compelled to set the record straight. Freedom is not the right to do whatever you want, whenever you want, and however you want. Judaism rejects such an idea. Instead, the Hebrew word Cheirut is derived from the word to choose. As in the blessing before the Torah, Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, who has chosen us from among the nations. In our Jewish tradition, freedom is about having the opportunity to make responsible choices. Being a bachor means that you have now reached the age of responsibility, that you are able to choose the path of Torah, the path which leads to life, and to accept the responsibility for yourself, both as an individual, but also crucially as a member of the community. From the first tastes of the fruit in the Garden of Eden onwards, humans were made to be able to choose. This is what freedom means biblically. Indeed, the essential Jewish story, the story of Passover, known as Zman Cheirutenu, the time of our freedom, details our slavery under the bitter repression of Pharaoh and the Egyptians. We are set free by God in order that we could worship God, accept Torah, and live lives of holiness, service, and dignity. This means that sometimes freedom is making the choice to limit our individual appetites, desires, and impulses, and to exert control over how we choose to live and what kind of community and society we choose to build. For example, turning off our electronic world on Shabbat so as not to be enslaved by it, or putting aside food and drink and fasting for a sacred day of spiritual cleansing and renewal. It also includes limiting ourselves so that we can leave space for others. It is the freedom of choosing to respect each other. You shall honor your mother and father. You shall not murder. You shall not steal. Of choosing to be invested in the common good. You shall open your hand to the poor. You shall provide for the stranger, orphan, and widow. And choosing to work on behalf of the collective. Standing at Sinai, the whole people answered, Na'aseh v'nishma. We shall observe, and we shall understand. And you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Simply put, along with the freedom of choice comes responsibility. As Jews, we know we are at our best when we exercise our freedom of choice to live by our most sacred values and traditions. When we give of ourselves, when we sacrifice for the benefit and well-being of others, and with the goal of the preservation and sanctification of life. For example, we are instructed to leave the corners of our fields uncut so that the poor, orphan, and widow can glean from our fields. This despite being our income, our hard work, and our produce. We nonetheless do so because hunger is an affront to God and our Jewish conscience. Or when we are commanded to pay communal taxes so that the roads for pilgrimage, the sacrificial offerings, and the temple itself can be maintained. We also give other tithes to fund schools, provide for the general protection, and maintain and improve the public works, like baths and markets. Or when we are commanded to leave the camp, to quarantine ourselves when we have an infectious disease like Cheirut or COVID-19, let alone get the vaccine and wear a mask. We do all of this so we may protect the community and preserve life Responsibilities and obligations in Jewish ethics and law are part of how we show respect and love for God and each other. Our values become real when we exercise our Cheirut, our freedom to choose. As Americans, we are still wrestling with our freedom of choice. The line between where my personal freedom ends and where the freedom of others or the community begins. Whether it is over gun control, are there limits and restrictions to my Second Amendment rights for the sake of others? Or the freedom of women, should the government control a woman's body, particularly her reproductive choices? Or sexual freedom, who can I choose to love? And will my love be equally recognized? Or the ballot box, who can have access to the vote, both in principle and in reality? Or education, what should or shouldn't be taught to our children in school? Creationism? Evolution? Our complex history? Or a literally whitewashed version? Or healthcare, whether at a minimum masks are or aren't required, or for that matter, a requirement to get a life-saving vaccine to protect my life and yours. Faced with these overarching dilemmas, how do we determine where to draw the line? Here, Jewish wisdom offers another insightful metric. When my individual freedom of choice puts the life of others and the community in danger, or damages the foundation of civil society, then our personal choice, our freedom, is suspended and superseded by the freedom of others, of the collective, the community, in order to ensure that we can all live together in dignity and peace. The sin of idolatry, for example, was not only an individual choice, but had ramifications on God's anger at the whole community. The sin of bearing false witness or judges who accepted bribes erodes the system of justice, not only in one case, but throughout the land. The sin of using false weights and measurements, cheating in business, could destroy the collective economy and the trust on which it operates. Let there be no doubt that there are consequences to the choices we make. Sometimes we choose poorly. Ashamnu, bagadnu, gazalnu, dibarnu dofi. We have sinned. We transgress. We are unkind. We are zealots for bad causes, to name but a few. But we can also choose to change, to seek forgiveness, to make better choices, to do the right thing, both as individuals and as a society. Again, freedom is not the right to do whatever we want, whenever we want, and however we want. Freedom is about the opportunity to make choices with the line drawn when those choices can hurt others or the well-being of the community. The founding fathers of our country also understood as much when they decided, after much anguished debate and numerous attempts at reconciliation with Great Britain, to pursue independence. It was anchored in the belief in communal self-determination and inalienable rights, among these, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These freedoms were given by God, but were in effect collectively dependent on a shared commitment. They depended on individuals working together, fighting together, respecting one another, and willing to sacrifice for something greater than themselves. Indeed, our individual freedoms have limits vis-a-vis the community. There are consequences to shouting "fire" in a crowded theater, deciding not to pay your taxes, defacing public property, slandering another person's reputation, or yes, storming the Capitol. Painfully throughout our history, the slogan of protecting my personal freedom was utilized as a means to oppress and suppress others' basic rights. The line drawn was not based on danger to the community or the foundation of civil society, but more tellingly, I would argue, to entrench power and privilege of some over others. I want to be free to choose, but you may not. Just ask African Americans or Native Americans how free they feel, or women, or the poor. It may be a hard and uncomfortable thing to hear. We may wish to deny it, make excuses for it, or try to explain it away. But in reality, there are some places in our country today where it is sadly easier to serve overseas and die for our country, fighting for others' freedom, than to cast a single vote at home, gain access to a quality education, or simply to have a roof over your head, food to eat, and safe water to drink. As Jews, we know that freedom is not given so easily by those who hold power to those who are seeking the freedom of choice. Pharaoh and the Egyptians did not give in so quickly. It took God 10 plagues, and then after that, the splitting of the sea, for us to gain the freedom of our own destiny. This, again, was not the freedom to do whatever we wanted, whenever we wanted, and however we wanted, but to choose to create a sacred society framed by the idea that human beings are created in the image of God. Our country, like each of us, is a work in progress. We have yet to fulfill our full potential. We are imperfect and make mistakes. But we are also larger than any one individual, a community whose fate is bound together on the long journey of freedom, collectively responsible for one another, seeking paths of dignity and peace. As we reflect and take responsibility on this Yom Kippur for the personal choices, both good and bad, each of us has made this past year, may we remember that freedom is not permission to do whatever we want, when we want, and how we want, but instead the opportunity to make sacred and sometimes difficult choices in our lives for God and out of respect and love for others. That we are in community together, more free when everyone has the opportunity for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. As the Torah teaches, before you this day I put life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life. May we be sealed for another year of freedom and life. Gamar Chatima Tova.